Looking at the flood of Noah again, this is part 3, and it's about Genesis chapter 8. And in Genesis chapter 8, 1 through 4, we see that it rained for nearly 4 months. And the ark rested in the 7th month on the 17th day of the month upon the mountains of Ararat. In Genesis 8:1, God remembered Noah and the animals and caused a wind to pass over the submerged earth. And God is beginning to refashion the earth as he did in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. And then in Genesis chapter 8, verse 2, we are told that the fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped and the rain from heaven was restrained. And then verse 3 tells us that the waters returned off the earth, and after the end of 150 days, the waters had abated. The ark then rested on the 7th month and 17th day upon the mountains of Ararat, in Genesis 8, verse 4. And then we are told that the waters decreased continually until the 10th month, and then on the first day of the month, the tops of the mountains were seen. In Genesis 8, verse 5, that can be found. But in Genesis chapter 8, verses 6 through 12, to see if the waters had receded, Noah first sent out a raven that did not return. And then he sent out a dove, and it returned to him. So he took it back into the ark. And 7 days later, he sent the dove out again, and it returned with an olive leaf. So Noah knew that the water was receding from the land. He waited another 7 days and sent out the dove again, and it did not return. And then later, in Genesis chapter 13, verse 19, when he removed the ark's covering, he could see that the land had now dried out, and this was the 601st year in the first month and first day of the month. We're told in verse 13, and I read that reference to you wrong, it's Genesis 8, verses 13 through 19. But in verse 13, we're told that the waters were dried up from off of the earth in the 601st year, in the first month and first day of that month. In verse 14, we are told that in the 2nd month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth dried. And then God told Noah for him and his sons and all their wives to go out of the ark and take with them all the animals in the ark. And so Noah did as God had told him to. So now, more than 7 months after the ark had been grounded, we see Noah and his family and all the animals come out of the ark. So they were in the ark a few days over 1 year. So once out of the ark, though, Noah built an altar unto the Lord, and took of every clean beast and clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And that's in Genesis 8, verse 20. In making the burnt offering, Noah is showing his gratitude to the Lord for working on his behalf. And then the Lord expressed his satisfaction with the offering made by Noah and said that he would never again curse the ground for man's sake, and that neither would he ever smite every living thing as he had just done. And that's in Genesis 8, verse 21. He also promised that while the earth remains, that seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and night shall not cease. So as we can see today, as we look around, the flood did not improve mankind. Man is still disobedient, evil, and depraved. But God will not destroy the earth in this manner again. God will tolerate sinful humanity until the end comes, which is the end of the 7-year tribulation and the second coming of Christ. And God will be faithful and preserve his creation. But finally, at the end of the millennium, he will make a new heaven and a new earth. In Genesis chapter 9, we're going to cover chapter 9 here in this video. Chapter 9, verses 1 through 17, we see that God made a covenant with this new world. God now calls on Noah to be fruitful and multiply in Genesis 9, verses 1 through 7. This is also what God had commanded Adam to do in Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. So man was now to start anew, and he would have dominion over the animal kingdom. Animals would now be eaten, can now be eaten for food if the blood is strained out. Genesis chapter 9, verses 3 through 4. And Genesis 9, verse 6 goes on to tell us that we cannot murder. It says, whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. So then God spoke to Noah and his sons and established a covenant with them and their seed, and with all the creatures that were on the ark with him, that he would not cut off all flesh any more by the waters of the flood, and neither would there be another flood that would destroy the earth. And that can be found in Genesis chapter 9, verses 8 through 11. God told Noah that the token of the covenant is for the perpetual generations, which includes us today. So he set his bow in the cloud and said it was a token of a covenant between me and the earth. And so this refers to the rainbow and is a visible indication of his covenant with man and all living creatures to this day and afterwards. And that's according to Genesis chapter 9, verses 14 through 17. And I thank you for listening.